Hey, good morning, Internet. This is Blind Justice, live on the streets of Aberdeen, Washington, sitting outside of City Hall, and this is day 55 of our peaceful protest, Resting is Not a Crime. And wanted to talk to you about nourishment a little bit, and how everything needs food. If something is going to live or continue, it needs to be nourished, it needs to be fed. And that's whether or not it's a destructive force, such as a bacteria, that's destructive bacteria, like a flesh-eating bacteria, or a virus, or a flower growing. And the same is true with your emotions and your emotional... Okay, I think we're back on. I'm saying the same is true with your emotions or emotional conditioning. So if you want love to continue, then you need to feed love in your life. If you want animosity and strife and hate to continue, then you feed animosity, strife, and hate in your life. We kind of talked about the physiological aspect of that a little bit ago with the hypothalamus and the releasing of neuropeptides that are associated with your emotions and how it becomes a feedback loop. But it goes beyond, well, how do you feed those emotions, I guess is a question that arises from that. And a lot of it is what you take in with your sensory perception, right? So your senses of taste, touch, hearing, smelling, sight, and thinking. So whatever you bring in to yourself through those 6 gateways, you then feed yourself, your person, from those sources, just like you feed your physical body nutrients from what you consume, food and drink. So what you look at and spend your time watching or listening to, on screens, on your phone, or on computer, on the internet, on the TV, and newspapers and magazines and books, video games, and even in person, what groups you go to, what events you go to, and what kind of behaviors and actions you're witnessing and consuming with your perceptions. That's the fuel, that's the food that you're ingesting, which then becomes the source, as it's digested, to feed different behaviors, different thoughts in your life, which then become behaviors and then become habits. So so just be mindful of what you ingest and consume and digest, because what you bring into yourself, reproduces. It perpetuates that nature. So if you're watching, lots of violent films and TV and video games and novels, and you go into shows or things that are based off of lots of violence, then you start acting violent in your speech or your actions. That's what you're perpetuating. That's what you're ingesting. But if you focus your attention on things that are peaceful and mindful and loving and kind, and then you'll start to see change in your life, change your attention, your focus, because that's what you're putting in. similarly with, you know, the kind of food you eat physically. So there's a parable of it's the son's flesh, where this is awful story, awful parable of this couple, this husband and wife, on this traveling through unknown area. They're going to a new country, a new land, and they have a young son, like a 3-year-old. And as they're going through the desert, they run out of food, and they're only about halfway. They're only like halfway through the desert, and so they make this awful decision that they have to kill their 3-year-old son and ration out his flesh. The parable's name is the son's flesh. And they eat a little bit of his flesh each day and carry his carcass on their shoulders to let it dry in the sun. And they're just, you know, they make it through the desert. So when that parable was brought to the Buddha, and he was asked about it, his response was basically, we need to be mindful in our eating and what we consume in all aspects of our lives, so we don't end up consuming the flesh of our children. And so people are like, well, that's just, how does that correlate? Well, for instance, we'll just talk in the physical sense, because it seems to be easy for people to connect. The animal agriculture on the planet is a huge industry. It's a massive industry. And I think it takes like 100 times more water to go into a cow to produce a kilogram of beef than it does to produce a kilogram of grain. So there's water consumption, freshwater waste for that. Then we have go into the pollution aspect of, it's 18% of the carbon emissions, or CO2 emissions, is from animal agriculture, which is more than the transportation industry. We have the destroying of the rainforest for grains, for growing crops to feed animals, so that the animals can be slaughtered and fed to people, rather than feeding the starving people that are dying of starvation every day all across the world, right? And then you have the aspect of not just eating meats, but other things that you consume that are unhealthy and are causing diseases, cancer, and obesity, which then that behavior is mirrored or picked up by our children, which then becomes, they pick it up sooner than we did, because a lot of this stuff wasn't on the market when we were kids. So they're eating the habits that you're eating, they're following the same habits, and they're killing themselves faster than you've killed yourself, and they are not fully developed. So literally your eating is affecting your children and their flesh, their bodies. And so then on the grander scale, like we talked about with the greater impact of animal agriculture, for instance, which is incredibly destructive for the planet and for the people of the planet. So that's just one aspect of how being mindful of what we consume can help foster in peace and respect for all life. And a lack of that fosters an eating and destroying of others, including our children, the ones that are closest to us. So just a little reminder to be aware and mindful of what you consume, what you ingest, because that's what, you know, your makeup is based on. So there are fresh ways of producing food, wholesome, healthy food, and I encourage everybody to find those research. We may put in some links to some different things that can help everyone recognize areas where they can be more mindful of what they ingest and find clean sources of food and water. All right, everybody, peace and love to you, and have a great day And be mindful of what you take in with your senses, with your thoughts, with your mouth, and what's in your desires and your emotional state. Alright, I'll talk to you guys later. Deo Presto Liber.